Well, I'm lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by Lenny Kaye, who has been involved in more endeavors than about anyone I know. And first of all, thanks for coming on, Lenny.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Any friend of Andy Paley's is a friend of mine.
There we go. Well, you've just had such an interesting career, and it kind of gets off to a start with your uncle.
Yes.
Who had written some songs. And tell me about your uncle and tell me how he brought you into the music business.
Well, my uncle, he was brother to my dad, of course, and it was a family that had music within them. My grandfather, Benjamin, was a drummer in Local 802. My dad was a piano player till he went into the import-export business. And, you know, my uncle, though he never really played an instrument except for the harmonica, became a songwriter, a lyricist. And his first hit was the follow-up to Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny, Brian Hyland's song. It was called Lopsided, Overloaded, and We Wrote It, about a car. And he wrote, you know, mostly MOR stuff. He did the lyrics for the love theme from The Godfather, Speak Softly Love, A Time for Us by Romeo and Juliet. And he was attempting to figure out how to get on the folk protest bandwagon with a guy named Richie Adams from the Fireflies. And he came up with a song called Crazy Like a Fox, and he called up his nephew, who had just started out in bands in New Jersey. And he said, you know, would you sing me Eve of Destruction over the telephone, which I did. And then 3 weeks later, I found myself in a recording studio for the first time singing my first non-hit, Crazy Like a Fox, under the name of Link Cromwell. So,
Link Cromwell.
Yes.
How did that name come about?
You know, he drew up a list of about 50 first names and 50 last names. Cromwell was kind of English inflected. And I think in those days, you know, like the Sir Douglas Quintet, it was a plus to have a little overseas connotation. Link is kind of like my name condensed and anagrammed. And, you know, they sounded nice together. So I became Link Cromwell and promptly unbecame Link Cromwell when after the record came out. But it's always been a good kind of little moment for me, because it showed that this interest I had in music and being a performer and being a fan of rock and roll, a writer, all of these things, I could find my place within the music. And I always salute my uncle Larry Cusick for that.
Oh yeah, well, you know, did it come out on a subsidiary of Starday Records? Is that right?
Yes, of all things, Hollywood Records, which it came out on, is actually an old school R&B label from Los Angeles. I guess Starday had acquired that. At the same time, I believe they also acquired King Records. Uh-huh. And I've actually collected, because us collectors like an excuse, records around my release, and there's some kind of discs that are known as kind of Northern Soul these days, some weird blues. It was kind of an eclectic label. I don't think they ever actually had a hit on their own, but you know, there I was in March of 1966, just about half a century ago, a recording artist. And you know, I performed in my local area in central New Jersey. I had a band called The Zoo. We played fraternity houses. We would always play Link Cromwell's greatest hit. And, you know, it was part and parcel of the great garage explosion that took place throughout America in the mid-'60s. It certainly gave me, you know, a good foundation for what I would be doing in the future. Amazingly enough, I always think I went to college and actually learned my future occupation, which was being a rock musician and a musical historian.
Right. Well, and certainly the garage band revolution played a part in one of the biggest and coolest moments of your career, which was putting together the Nuggets record. So
yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I lived it. That's basically it. I was a rock writer. I just started out. I kind of covered the Stooges, MC5, Velvet Underground wing of rock and roll. I started out writing for jazz and pop, and I wrote a review of the first Stooges album as it came through, I believe, for a magazine called Fusion up in Boston. And Danny Fields called me up out of the blue and said, "Who are you, and why don't you come to a press party?" And it was kind of my entrance into the world of the rock press in New York at the tail of the 60s. In the summer of 70, Esquire had their heavy 100 of the music industry, and I believe Danny had something to do with it, or Lillian Roxon, but I was the token rock critic in there. Jack Holzman, president of Elektra, liked rock critics. I mean, he had groups and albums that lent themselves well to this new style of rock journalism, which kind of attempted to analyze music in the same spirit that the musicians made it.
Right.
He called me up and he said, "Why don't you, come work for Elektra as kind of an independent scout?" And by the way, I have this idea for an album called Nuggets, which is those songs which are the only good song on an album. Or the unusual song. I think Jack was trying to clean out his record collection personally. And he gave me it, and I spun it toward, all these bands that I had, that seemed to fit together in some abstract way.
Right.
I didn't really, looking at Nuggets now, I see that really stylistically it's kind of all over the place. It's not specifically what would be known as garage rock.
Right.
There's some orchestral things and some weird things and things done by people who are not really garage bands but musical professionals.
Sure.
But they all seem to fit together, and over the course of what turned out to be about 2 years, Nuggets came together. I always give Jack props because it wasn't probably the record he imagined when he started out, but he had that thing which all great record company presidents have, which is trust somebody's judgment and let them run with it as far as they can. And because he did that, because he allowed me to, keep fighting for the right cover and to do this kind of archaeological liner notes and to find all these great songs, which beyond garage rock are great songs, great slabs of singles. That album has lived, many more years than just about any oldies album one can think of.
Oh, it has, and I think that, for people that came along afterwards, that weren't there collecting records or listening to records at the time, I think it's also kind of boosted the credibility of a lot of those bands and kind of made them, it's definitely kept them in the limelight for sure.
Well, I'm happy about that. I mean, we all love great music, and somebody who makes great music should be remembered. I had the pick of the litter. I mean, I was first on the block, getting a chance to choose from it. There were records I could never get. I couldn't get 96 Tears. I don't think I could get Talk Talk at the time, the Music Machine song. But basically, I was just going by instinct. I mean, some of those records were 3 years old when I put them on my list. I didn't have the kind of long-term perspective on what the album was, and probably that's a good thing because it would have been a little more generic and a little more predictable. And, there's that sense of discovery. And for me, discovering a music, when you discover what the range of a musical genre is, it's the most exciting time because you're experiencing it as it grows within you. I've been through many musical genres over my life, I'm now deep into New Orleans in the mid-50s,
Right.
And learning about artists I never heard of.
Right.
I've gone through bebop phases and, of course, always country music phases. I love country
Right.
music.
Uh-huh.
There's so many musics in the world. I just wish I had time to experience and learn to play all of them.
Well, so tell me right now in your New Orleans phase, what are you picking up on there?
Well, I'm working on a book called Lightning Striking, which kind of goes deep within musical scenes, I guess is what you call it, moments where time and space interact and really seem to encapsulate rock and roll at that moment.
Right.
Of course, I choose a year kind of randomly and then talk about all what happened leading up to that year and what might have happened after it. So it's just kind of a little peg, but I've just been writing about Little Richard discovering himself at J&M Studios in September of 1955.
Okay.
And all the other incredible music that came out of that particular studio, some of which I was aware of, some of which I'd heard names like Professor Longhair, where I'd never really investigated what these artists sound like, and sometimes they're very obscure artists, Archibald and Roy Montrell and the Bees. I mean, just great, great artists, and I'm just kind of living in my imagination in New Orleans in 1957 and seeing, what comes out. And when I'm done with this, hopefully in another week or so, I'll be moving to San Francisco in 1967. So that'll be a fun transition.
Yeah.
And sometimes I was there. I mean, I was in San Francisco in 67 as a callow hippie youth. And so when it comes time for a little eyewitness account, I'll make myself a minor character. But really the focus is on the music, as for me it always is.
Right. Well, and Professor Longhair is certainly a favorite around here. I mean, that guy had a sense that, I mean, there's certainly predecessors in that piano playing, I mean, the whole New Orleans piano playing thing, but man, he comes from a different place. He's so fun.
He's I mean, all of these people are central to listen to Roy Brown's Good Rockin' Tonight, recorded in 1947, and think that, this may be the first rock and roll song. Certainly a case can be made. It's just great to spend one's life within the music, and the fact that I also not only get to research it and collect the records from it and enjoy it and attempt to understand it, but I get to play it and convert it into my own musicality and take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and see what it's like to actually not only listen to these songs but sing them. This summer when I was getting into it during sound check, me and the guys in Patti's group would do Sea Cruise, and it was just a fun song to sing. Frankie Ford and one of the great New Orleans songs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so when you mentioned Patti, when you started playing with her kind of in the early 70s, or I mean the very early 70s. Like
just about as early as you get. We did our first performance February 10th, 1971, a 45th anniversary coming up very quickly.
Wow. And tell me about how, I mean, Patti was already a fairly well-known poet, but tell me how it came about that she started wanting to play some music too.
Well, it really kind of grew unbidden. We didn't set out to have a rock band. It was actually the furthest from our consciousness. For the first reading, Patti just thought she wanted to infuse her reading with a little unexpected stuff, and she asked me. I was working at Village Oldies at the time.
Right.
And she knew I played a little guitar, very little guitar, and we got together, and I kind of listened to how the cadences of her speech were and the kind of rhythm and even the melody within her poems, and came up with a couple rudimentary chord settings to accompany her rhythmically. We didn't do anything for another 2.5 years after that. It wasn't meant to be a thing. It was just meant to be one of these like art happenings that go off into the atmosphere.
Right.
And then when we started playing on a kind of monthly basis, she would read her poems, and then there would be a piano player, and she'd do some standards, and then I'd come up and we'd do our kind of energy poetry, three chords, and the power of the word, as we called it. And, pretty soon I'd be up on stage and playing along with the song, and then the song would lead into a poem, and the poem, it grew very organically and slowly. It wasn't until, maybe the end of 1974, early 1975, where it started to have the shape of a rock and roll band, and we didn't even add a drummer until the summer of 1975, right before we made Horses. So it was a very long and very organic growth, and I'm always grateful for that, because I always think if we would have started with a desire to be a band, we would have been a kind of normal band. But instead, we were able to harness our energies and do something which surprised us, surprised the world, and is still being appreciated today.
Oh, absolutely. What did John Cale add to that record?
He added a kind of funhouse mirror. He challenged us. He took musical stands that we had to react to and see how we felt about them. I think he wanted a more layered musical record, more of a record. We were more into having it feel improvised. In the end, I think we probably got both what we wanted, in the sense that, there are songs in there that just came off the moment, and there are songs which we built as more standard songs. But any producer is a mirror to the artist, and the artist looks in and tries to see how they feel about what they see in that mirror. And it's great when you're on the same page, but even if you're not, the creative tension between the two results in the making of a record. And, listening to Horses today, it was our first record. We were somewhat innocent in the studio. And, it's hard to, you don't really know that you're making something that will be listened to 40 years later. But as it turns out, for me, especially playing Horses over this past year as a kind of anniversary celebration, it's amazing to me how incredibly intricately the album not only hangs together as a concept, but moves through its many layers. And it seems in a strange way, especially for when it was there, when it was made, to seem even more coherent and concepted than it did at the time.
And it really holds up. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
It's remarkable, but Patti is a remarkable artist. I mean, we function within pop music and rock and roll, and we love that. But also, she has a sense of grander metaphysical issues that she deals with as a creator, and to see how her mind works and to follow it and try to get there and open the door before she goes barreling through. It's a great privilege and honor to be in such a band with such high artistic ideals. And really, that's what we're about. Whatever fame and fortune have come along with it, it really never matters to us unless we're in the place where we can feel like we're living up to the ideals with which we began.
Right. And I mean, of course, you've obviously been involved in so many things, but there's also a sense that, on your, when you get to the point of an obituary, which we hope is not for many years, but I mean, that's going to be at the top. I mean, being involved in the Patti Smith group. And
well, you never know. I mean, I'm working every day. You never know what's going to rise to the surface or have a wild hit.
Well, and
to be honest, I never think of where I've been it's always when I sit down at the work I'm doing, it's how to move that work forward. That it piles up so gratefully is great. I mean, what can one say? But when I sit down at the paper, at the page that I'm writing, or the piece of music that I'm trying to figure out, I try to exist in the present.
Sure.
I don't want to feel the burden of my past or its promise. One thing Patti always says, which I believe, is that progress is in the future. It's keeping up with the present. And for us, this sense of continual evolution has been really paramount. Sometimes it's kind of abstract when somebody comes up and asks me to sign a copy of Horses or Nuggets or, my Whalen book or whatever you do, because the further you get from it, the more it seems like a child that you once had that's off in the universe, and occasionally you hear from them, when they're doing it. But they're leading their own lives, infecting people in their own way. Like I said, I really I try to just focus on what word I'm going to place after the next word.
Right.
And, it keeps me honest, to be honest.
Well, I mean, certainly when you look through all of the projects that you've been involved in, I mean, you throw things out there like those early Suzanne Vega albums, which are just amazing records in their own right. And what did you, in asking you about John Cale, what did you bring to those records?
I brought a sense of encouragement to step outside predictabilities, I guess. When Suzanne, I was first introduced to Suzanne, she had management and a person working with her producer, but of course folk music at that time was kind of anathema to any record company, so they tried to kind of folk rock it up. And when I listened to it, I thought, well, this is, kind of ordinaire. How can we make this unique instead of going toward a more folk rock element? Let's just bring it back. Suzanne is really an intimate artist. If we're going to put drums on, make sure that they don't sound like, normal drums, that they're more percussive, that all you can be there is encouraging. Make suggestions. The artist can say yes, no, maybe. A lot of what I did with Suzanne was just like, let her breathe freely, to not worry whether putting an instrument on her record was going to take away from her integrity, but would help her to find a way in which to express her art uniquely. Suzanne and Patti also, the culture is calling for these people. Suzanne came out at a time when the pop music was very cartoonish in a certain way. Twisted Sister, Cyndi Lauper, all great artists. But there was something refreshing about Suzanne bringing it down to just herself and a guitar and a couple accessoried instruments. In the same way for Patti, the culture, we're a weird band. We are idiosyncratic, but the culture seemed to be calling out for someone who wanted to infuse rock and roll with new energy. And that's fantastic. So it's kind of a trade-off. My job when I work with anybody, including myself, is just to get everybody beyond feeling self-conscious about what they're doing, but dig deep, learn your instincts, and trust in them that they'll take you to a unique place.
Well, and I think too, I think that one of the things that's so fun about Suzanne, if you ever get to see her live, is she's just such a great storyteller and such a funny person, and just those early records to me kind of took some people in a different direction in in a different way, but a lot like, horses did. I mean, it definitely brought out some different things and certainly had some success as well.
Well, I'm just, I'm lucky I get to work with artists. Artists feel like I've never been a metal producer or a rockabilly producer or whatever. I don't really have a sound. Mostly what I do when I produce is listen, walk around with the artist, see how they perceive the world. I worked with an artist named Chris Kawenko in the 90s, and it was great to just go into a bookstore with him, and he'd pick up a children's book with crocodiles on it and show me some weird picture, and you could see the beauty in that picture. When I wrote Waylon Jennings' autobiography, a very strange literary genre, one might say, mostly what I did was listen to him, how he phrased things, what his voice was like, how he would perceive things, so that when it came time for me to describe them through his eyes, even if he hadn't told this to me, what it's like in the studio in the Nashville 60s.
Right. I
could place myself within his consciousness and be him. You have to be, I always think with Patti, what I do best with her is I breathe with her. I follow her, her rises and falls through how she takes a breath. These are not, simple ways in which to be. And I guess, for my own work, I try to listen to what I'm saying and what I want to say and hear the music from within so I can hear it clearer. I mean, that's you can sit and play the guitar for hours and your fingers get into habits, and you're going to go for that one chord, and then you'll move it to the four, and all of a sudden you'll have a song that sounds like 400 other songs, which sometimes is good. But on the other hand, if you really listen to where the melody is taking you inside, you will probably, it's all listening and paying attention to the call of art.
Well, so certainly you mentioned country music earlier, and you mentioned Waylon Jennings. How did it come about for you to get the opportunity to write with Waylon on this?
I was coming to the tail of my production career. I could see that the jobs I was being offered were, kind of further down on the food chain, demos and things like that. And I was also really kind of tired of being in the studio. It's a very small, enclosed world. I'd done about 16, 18, 20 records, and I was feeling somewhat confined. I did, and the final straw for me was working on 4 songs for a woman, which took months for some reason, and when we finally finished the final mixes, she broke into tears and said, "Oh my God, my album is ruined," and I just thought, I got to get out of here. So I met a guy named David Dalton, who I knew from, who I wrote half a book with in the 70s called Rock 100. He wrote 50 of them, and I wrote 50 of them. And he said, "You should do what I'm doing. I just wrote Marianne Faithfull's book, and it's, as he explained to me, a very strange literary genre where the better you are at it, the more people don't think you're there. You're synthesizing interviews from 20 different people and historical facts, but also telling the artist's story." And he introduced me to his agent, a fellow named Tony Secunda, who had managed Procol Harum and stuff, and now is doing the literary thing, who knew Waylon. And Waylon had burned through 2 writers by then. One writer tried to out-hip him, and the other one he just knew too well. And he didn't want to meet me, but I paid on my own dime to go see him one morning. And I told him, I said, "Listen," and he didn't really know who I was at all or that I had any history, and I was just presenting myself to him as Joe Ryder. And I said, "Listen, I know that your story is a lot of sex and drugs, and we all like those kind of tales, but I'm really curious to see what makes you get up on stage for 200 nights of a year." And he said, "Well, get on the bus." And next day I was in Kansas City with him, and looking at his audience and seeing kids 6 and, oldsters 60, at least it seemed
right.
oldster in those days. And I just, I just talked with him, and we became really good friends. I remained friends with him till the end of his life.
Uh-huh.
He was always appreciative that I was able to help him tell his story. And I have a good friendship with his wife, Jessie Coulter, and we're just completing an album ourselves of her improvisations on the Psalms, which is a beautiful, beautiful record.
Oh, wow.
And, so we're almost I'm almost ready to hand that baby in after 9 years. And, it's just a beautiful story. Waylon and I appreciated what he did in his world, and he learned because every once in a while I'd go to a country party and some younger country guys would come up and say, "What are you doing here?" And he would say, "Yeah, you didn't tell me about that, Suzanne Vega." And I said, "It ain't my job to tell you anything. It's your job to tell me stuff." So we had a beautiful friendship, and I was able to write his book. And of course, it got me really deep into the beauty that is country music.
I guess one thing that I found about Waylon, my dad was a big Waylon fan, and I went to my first Waylon concert in '78, I think, when I would have been 6. And I saw him kind of, I was obviously very young, but I saw him 2 or 3 times at that time, and then saw him a couple times later. And I honestly think the best time I saw him was the last time that I saw him playing with the Super Suckers and a bunch of punk rock kids at an Atlanta club called Heaven or Hell. There were multiple layers of it or whatever, and it was just him and a guitar player.
Wow.
And I think he was just so genuinely excited to see young people show up to these shows. And it really brought out kind of a playful side. And did you see anything like that, like that being discovered by a new audience kind of brought him to a new place?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he Metallica loved him. He responded to that spirit, and it was great to see him always. He always gave 100%. One of the times I went with him to a studio was for a Buddy Holly tribute album that Mark Knopfler was putting together, and just seeing him out there sing those songs from deep within him, he was a great human being, and I have to say I miss him. Right.
Well, tell me about the new thing you're doing with Jessie.
When I was working on the Waylon book, I was staying at their house and in Nashville, and I came downstairs one day, and there's Jessie, who's very spiritual. Beyond denomination, just really spiritual, sitting behind the piano with the Bible open, putting her hands on chords and singing the Psalms. And I just watched entranced for about 20 minutes while she did that. And I just thought, man, that was gorgeous. And a few years after Waylon passed, I'm talking with her, and she had just done a record with Don Was. And I said, Jess, there's a record I would love to hear from you, and that's these improvisations on the Psalms. And she said, oh, that'd be cute. And she wrote a couple songs where she would take lines from the Psalms and make them into songs. But when she sent them to me, I thought they sounded like your general Christian folk stuff. It wasn't quite what I'd heard there. So she came to New York when her son Shooter was living around the corner from me down the Lower East Side for a while. And I got her in the studio, and we opened up the Bible and chose a couple of the Psalms that were not about, blood and thunder and the Babylonians, running in the streets. Some of the more sweet ones. And over the course of 2 afternoons, we just would open this, she would place her fingers on the keys and wait for seconds and just sing these Psalms.
Wow.
One of them I would accompany her on guitar. One of them I just played guitar and she sang along with me. But at the end of these 2 afternoons, we had 7 Psalms done, which I thought was beautiful. They were great. The performances were, most of them were either first or second takes. We never got to a third take. It was just very spontaneous. We hadn't rehearsed anything. She hadn't figured up anything. She would just sit there and place her fingers on the keys. A year later, she was also in New York, and I brought her up to the same studio, and we did the other 5, including the hit Psalm, the 23rd. And over the past few years, because they're very delicate performances, and I didn't want to just start like putting a bunch of crap on it, I added certain musicians here and there. Drummer Bobby Previty, a bassist named Paul Dugan, Al Cooper on keyboards for organ, B3 for a couple great songs, a Bulgarian singing group called the Black Sea Hotel. Very, very minimal stuff. A harpist. And, slowly, just more to differentiate each cut from the other, give it its own personality. And now, after these many years, it's just about ready to be finished, and Sony Legacy will be putting it out sometime in the next year. We haven't figured out exactly when. And I'm really happy. It's one of the most beautiful albums I've ever been involved with. Wow. The fact that it actually came about so purely is a true blessing.
Yeah. I mean, that just sounds marvelous, and she certainly has her own many tales to tell with being involved with Duane Eddy and
everything. I think she's actually working on a memoir now. So I'll be the first to read it. But she's just a beautiful, spiritual, loving person. I try to approach these psalms not as as secularly as one can. Sure. Even though, there's a great spiritual depth to them. But these are some of the first song poems in recorded history. Sure. And I'm very happy to have helped David's words and sensibility come through to the 21st century. Right.
Well, I mean, that's just an amazing project. I can't wait to hear that.
Hopefully it'll be, I'm just kind of touching up these mixes. It's very, it's minimal what's happening. Jessie's piano, her voice, little guitar, and little accessories and decorations just to, keep them together. But it's a beautiful record, and I feel very proud of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the world responds to it.
Well, that's a fantastic thing. Now, my final question is going to be about the days of Village Oldies when Patti Smith and was Harry Smith working there too?
Nope. Harry Smith wasn't a worker. It was Bleecker Bob and Broadway Al. Harry Smith really collected 78s, and they mostly sold 45s and 33s at Village Oldies. But I worked there. I started there in 1970. I worked my way up to $10 a day. By the time I left in 1975, when we were on the verge of touring with horses. And, a great experience. Patti would come in there, and, we'd put on our favorite records and dance around. And a lot of Nuggets ideas came from there, because late on Saturday night when things slowed down, and I would just be pulling records from the shelf and playing them, and then it seemed like I had a little playlist going when I would do this anyway, so I would just write them down.
Wow.
Well, I love the idea of a record store, to go in and just explore and find something that you might not have heard or that you were looking for, and talk about it with the people surrounding you. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it seems to be getting lost, but it is a beautiful thing. Well, I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you, Lenny, and
no, it's my pleasure, and I'm glad to be out on the Webonet.
Thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Dale. Enjoy it, and keep the airwaves humming.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Lenny Kaye. If you've enjoyed this interview, there are plenty of others at DaleWileyShow.net. We've been doing this show for about a month, and I'm pretty happy with how many great people have come to visit with us. Go to that website, buy some books, throw some money. Copyright 2016.